Hello and welcome back to UnHerd. I'm Florence Reed. Health insurance CEO Brian Thompson was shot to death in New York City by a masked man last week. And after that, a manhunt ensued, with speculation and rumour abounding. Was this a professional hit or a disgruntled customer of the health insurance company that he ran? Clues at the scene suggested there might be a political aspect to the killing. There were bullet casings with the words "deny" and "defend" found on the floor near where it happened, which was shorthand for the evasive tactics of medical insurers. And a wad of Monopoly money was found stuffed inside a backpack abandoned in Central Park. So the plot was thickening, and then suddenly a suspect was apprehended. 26-year-old Luigi Mangione was arrested on Monday at a McDonald's in Pennsylvania. He had a handwritten manifesto, multiple fake IDs, and a gun on his person. He is now in court in connection to the murder of the United Healthcare CEO. So, how did a high school valedictorian and engineering graduate from the University of Pennsylvania become an alleged vigilante assassin? Until an official trial takes place, we can't be sure, and even then we might never have the full story. But what Mangione has left us with is a hefty digital footprint, from which maybe we can find some clues to his motives. To help us wade through these very murky waters is one of our favourite writers, an online oracle, Katherine Dee. Welcome to the show, Katherine.
Hey, thanks for having me.
This episode is sponsored by Lumen. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And on the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs and gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workout, sleep, and even stress management. All you have to do is breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism. Lumen will tell you if you're burning mostly fat or carbs. Then, Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements. You can also breathe into it before and after workouts and meals, so you know exactly what's going on in your body in real time, and Lumen will give you tips to keep you on top of your health game. It can also track your cycle as well as the onset of menopause and adjust your recommendations to keep your metabolism healthy throughout the hormonal shifts, so you can keep up your energy and starve off cravings. So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/unheard to get 15% off your Lumen. That is lumen.me/unheard for 15% off your purchase. You just told me before we came online there, so I have to pick you up on it because I would be a terrible journalist if I wasn't, that you were actually a moderator on a forum, or what was it, a Discord chat in which...
The Discord server.
In which this man, Mangione, was a member. Can you just explain what happened?
Sure. So during COVID, a friend of mine had a Discord server that was for people who wanted to quickly create and ship apps. It was basically a way to practice programming as a young person, and it got a lot of attention, and it got really big. And so I just helped her out with it. And then I saw a tweet that was from someone who was formerly involved and was just like, he was in this, name of the Discord server. And yeah, that's it. I didn't know him or anything. I just thought it was like, he seems to be connected with everyone, at least everyone in sort of this ecosystem.
It also defies, I think, his reading tastes, a kind of very simplistic idea of his motivations, which is also why we find it so fascinating here. Because, of course, as soon as this crime happened, there were groups of people who wanted to co-opt him for their cause, the unknown assassin at that point. There were lots of people who wanted him on the left, for example, to be a kind of anti-corporate anarcho-syndicalist or something, a kind of terrorist with the precise aim to terrorize the millionaires at the top of these American healthcare businesses. And for a while that seemed like it might be true, but then when you actually read into the background of this young man, it seems that there are more complex factors at play. Can you tell me a bit about what his digital footprint and the various reading lists that he's left behind him tell us about his tastes and what sort of influences might have had on his thinking?
So, we can only speculate, right? Like, if someone looked at my Goodreads, I don't know what they would think, but based on what we have, if it is an accurate representation of his person in any way, we do know that he suffered from chronic back pain, and he read quite a bit about it. He was interested in psychedelics for healing, right? Not for recreation necessarily. He left a glowing review of Ted Kaczynski's manifesto. He liked Tim Urban. I'd say he was like tech trad. He was like interested in traditionalism, but he was also a tech bro. Likely had some libertarian leanings. And as you mentioned, he really liked John Haidt, and he retweeted quite a bit. The writer I really like, Gurwinder, who's very similar to John Haidt in spirit. He seemed pretty convinced that the internet was deleterious to society, right? He was a strong believer in banning social media. It seemed very anti-tech motivated.
That feels very distinct from the desires of many people who, as soon as this happened, of course, jumped to the conclusion that this must be a kind of Occupy Wall Street style attempt to bring down the corporate capitalists of America. This is more of a horseshoe, you might call it, issue, one that does not sit neatly on left or right. It's this traditionalist, you used that word in a piece recently, and I want to dig into that because I don't quite know what that means anymore. I feel like that's become quite murky. What does it mean to be a traditionalist in this sense, and is that maybe where he's coming from philosophically?
So trad has become sort of a catch-all label. It used to have a very precise meaning. Now it sort of just means people who are somewhere on the anti-modernity spectrum. A lot of the people and podcasts that he seemed to be interested in were people who were saying, get away from pornography, ban social media for children under 16, be less controlled by our devices. So when I say trad, I don't mean like capital T traditionalism like Evola or Guénon. I mean like lowercase t, very colloquial, like he wants to return to like a real or imagined past where things weren't as infected by technology, maybe bureaucracy. Something that I've seen floated and that I thought myself was, is it possible that he targeted Brian Thompson because United Healthcare uses AI to deny claims? You take in the psychedelics, like is it that they're denying maybe what he perceived as a more holistic type of care? They're using AI to make health decisions for people that are leading to denial of care. You're right. It is nonpartisan. It's not the clean anti-capitalism that maybe people wanted it to be.
You mentioned earlier that he was a fan of Ted Kaczynski's Unabomber Manifesto. This is a kind of text that has become the text for a number of right-leaning thinkers, perhaps, online particularly. Can you just explain briefly for an audience who may not have read the Unabomber Manifesto what Ted Kaczynski was arguing in that and why it might have reflected on how Mangione saw the world?
It lines up pretty perfectly with some of his other social media interests. Granted, right, the people he was interested in didn't advocate violence. Ted Kaczynski wanted to use violence because he felt that our lives had become too encumbered by proxy activities, that we had moved away from our natural purpose. Technology had enslaved us, really. And that's sort of a broad stroke description of it. But again, if you look at some of the things that Luigi Mangione was concerned with, like pornography, that's sort of like, it sort of perfectly lines up. What's really interesting about his Goodreads review is that he mentions he saw on a Reddit thread, sometimes the only communication that people will listen to is violence. That seemed to resonate with him quite a bit. Again, speculating, it wasn't an act of violence that it was chaotic, that was nihilistic, that was this, the world is over, you may as well explode. It seems like if all of these clues are really to say something, he thought he was doing something to be heard, to make a difference in the world.
I mean, hence the kind of handwritten manifesto and the elements of this that feel very purposeful and have been pre-planned. This is no longer looking at all like something that's spur of the moment, a crime of passion, someone whose family member has been denied healthcare and they go on a rampage. That was one of the early theories, but that feels less and less like it's true, and this feels more and more like something that has been planned for a long time.
Yeah, definitely. The bullet casings were engraved. He must have been planning this for a while.
Talk to me about this kind of discontent with modernity and why it's caught on with so many particularly young people.
What's interesting is the tech bros that sort of lean this way, right? Sometimes, like I said, they hold both opinions, right? That a very mediated life is bad for people, but we can reshape the way we use technology to be productive, to do, to better the world. So that's why you see, like, on X, you see this everywhere. This sort of like retrofuturism. Well, it's not retrofuturism. It's like trad futurism, sort of, right? Mm-hmm. So bring back maybe more traditional family structures. Remove dating apps, bring back matchmaking. That was another thing Mangione seemed to be interested in, that he had responded to a tweet about Keeper, an app that uses technology to matchmake people. And it's not a dating app. It's meant for people to find a spouse. And I think that's becoming, and has been for years, becoming a louder voice in the conversation.
This feels, though, that it's a step up or a change in the way in which we're going to be having this conversation going forward, because, of course, a kind of anti-tech platform has often been aligned with other more benign and quieter forms of activism, like the hippie movement, and then latterly a kind of trad movement that was more about homesteading and tradwifery and all of those kind of things, like raw milk and butter at the farmer's market. It is not associated with vigilante assassinations in New York City.
I would agree that let's use technology more intentionally crowd wherever they fall on that spectrum, right? Because it can be like start a charter city and have super advanced science and be super into longevity, but also get rid of social media, right? Like it is a very wide spectrum. You don't really think of violence, and violence is not a piece of that subculture, really. It may be at the far fringes, but it's like, I can't stress enough, like, how not radical the people he was interested in are. I mean, they're all thought leaders, for lack of a better word, who just are trying to help people lead more intentional lives and not be so glued to TikTok, right? They're absolutely under no circumstances saying, let's destroy the system. They're saying, like, let's bring back, learning math the old-fashioned way. It's Ted Kaczynski obviously is pretty out there, but I mean everyone else absolutely not violent in any sense of the word.
Is there a potential that this could become a kind of flashpoint for a more violent version of that activism?
I think people will try. Sure. I mean, there is a lot of productive work going on that's not, that's going through the legal channels, right? There is a lot of activism that already exists. People trying to get laws changed, particularly in the United States, right? Like take unfettered internet usage out of schools, out of the classroom. There's a lot like that going on. And I know there's some going on in the UK as well. I do think it has the potential to be a sort of vibe shift. There have been several very loud acts of violence this year. There were 2 immolations, so people lighting themselves on fire in protest of the conflict with Israel and Palestine. And there have been 2 assassination attempts. These are acts of violence targeting a single person or facing inward, right? It's not an explosion of violence. They're trying to make a single statement. What those statements are isn't always clear, but it's a single statement. They all feel like expressions of activism. The mass shooting, on the other hand, makes a statement, but it tends to be more nihilistic. It tends to be this chaotic, explosion of anger, of discontent of some kind. And mass shootings are, by experts, like widely considered a form of suicide, in a way that these actions don't feel suicidal. They don't feel like, nothing matters. It feels like things do matter, and this is how we're going to change it. And I'm wondering if there's going to be a shift from giving up and taking everyone with you in this very horrific way to I demand change, and it's going to happen no matter what. And again, a very horrific way.
It feels as though Mangione was intending to be caught, given that he had this manifesto ready, and that actually what's important to him is not to completely evade the law, but rather to bring it to the attention of the right people. Does that sound about right?
I think so. everybody wants to come up with their own story. I feel like the press is often racing against viral social media threads. It feels like every time something happens, it's like if the story is a corpse, everyone's a vulture, just, picking it apart until there's nothing left, until there's just a single bone, and then it gets forgotten. And then maybe a pattern emerges over time. And you zoom out and you're like, oh, this has happened 6 times this year. It does feel like we are reaching it's this turbocharged moment where everybody has to know everything and then we forget. And that's kind of disturbing in and of itself.
I wonder where it will land those who have been mentioned in the manifesto itself or been found on the reading list. This is an interesting conundrum, a very modern one, where your work, no matter how benign it is, gets mentioned in the manifesto or is read and loved by someone who does something terrible. And then where does that leave you? I do wonder. I mean, of course, we'll be speaking to many of the people who he was reading in the coming weeks because they are regular contributors to UnHerd. But I do wonder where that leaves them.
Take someone like John Haidt. What is he supposed to do? He's trying to help children. He didn't do anything wrong. None of the people he read did anything wrong. And it is what it is. You can't control people's reactions.
What do you think this is going to mean for American culture when it comes to how we think about these issues, the issues that he is clearly invested in, whether or not they're the core motivations behind this crime, we don't know yet. But do you think there's going to be a broader conversation about technology, our relationship to it, and not just the cost of healthcare in the US, but actually this much bigger philosophical, cultural question around how much of our lives are dominated by artificial intelligence or mediated through screens? Is that going to be the next big conversation, or is it going to be that flash in the pan that disappears?
What I think is probably going to happen is they'll replace Brian Thompson. I don't know how much will change. Executives will probably see more security, as they should. I would be terrified if I was in their position. The American people might have their internet usage more surveilled, and the media, maybe we will start paying more attention to these concerns. And we do not want to live in a world where, let's say, AI is looking at, like, again, perfectly benign reading choices. It's like you check Tim Urban out from the library and they're like, we got to flag this. We don't want to live in that world. We probably already live in it, unfortunately. And that's where the PSYOP thing comes in. Anytime something like this happens, the first PSYOP explanation, and I'm not saying this is, again, what I think, but this is sort of what the line is this is to increase surveillance.
So that would be, to explain to our audience, a psychological operation is a kind of situation in which the public are made to think one thing so that a crackdown can occur. They're made to think that there is a disproportionate threat coming from one direction. It's actually false, but is allowing for a greater crackdown on civil liberties. Is that fair?
Exactly. And I mean, who knows if that ever happens, right? That's what people think. And I also think that it's not unreasonable to assume that, real organic acts of violence do lead to more surveillance in some circumstances. And sometimes it's, the road to hell, the road to dystopia is paved with good intentions.
It's easier than ever to access this material, and it turns us all into these kind of sleuths, criminal sleuths. Do you think it affects the way in which we relate to law enforcement and to the idea of policing?
It's been a thing for a long time, right? Famously, here's another young violent man who was on the cover of Rolling Stone, Joe Arsenayev, right? Remember, was it 10 years ago? Was it 12 years ago now that Reddit decided they were going to find him and they just accidentally pinned it on another just random guy? The internet really does mobilize people's sleuthing instincts. That was the dream of the internet. Initially, of course, what people didn't think about is the middleman, the platforms, the algorithm. What role do they play in all of this?
I can only speak for myself. I try and keep off the internet as much as possible, and I've been inundated. It has been absolutely non-stop barrage of information about this guy and takes and speculation.
I feel physically ill sometimes, not because I'm disturbed by it, because it's like there's just so much stuff. maybe I should read The Anxious Generation.
Maybe you're becoming you're being desensitized.
You know, they say that like maybe Mangione was one-shotted by ayahuasca, right? So they mean like maybe he did so many psychedelics that it messed up his brain. Mm-hmm. I think many people, perhaps myself included, look at the screen so much that it's just scrambled our brains. So maybe maybe this is a sign to log off for a little bit. It's too much.
Perhaps an unintended consequence of his manifesto, but if it does get someone to log off, perhaps that would please him in the end. Katherine Dee, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you.
So that was Katherine Dee, internet impresario, giving us a deep dive into the mind of Luigi Mangione, or at least his potential motivations as read from his Goodreads, his internet history, his Twitter profile. Of course, these things do not make up the full motivations or expression of someone's inner life, but they give us some clues, and very interesting and quite conflicting ones too. We'll be keeping a close eye on this story, of course, as it develops and is so close to home in so many ways, and we hope to see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.